Alright, so hello everybody, welcome to another Warframe video, and today I want to talk a little bit about a setup that I've been fuffing around with, and it's focused around the Contagious cloud augment for Saryn. It's one of the augments that got changed, or rather buffed, with the latest update, so I wanted to see what I can do with it. Because the thing is, when you get Saryn, the first thing you will most likely see is her spores. Her spores are incredibly powerful, and when you build her for spores, you can get a lot of things done, especially things like Elite Sanctuary Onslaught, because she can wipe out the entire map in seconds. And I, for a while, wanted to try something different with her, so that's exactly what I did. Now, the setup might look a little bit weird, mainly because I didn't want to break my spore setup, but let me explain the idea behind this build, and you can then do whatever you want with it. You can even copy it, it works just fine. So the ore I'm using here is Energy Siphon, and the reason for that is, well, I just want a lot of energy. I want to be able to cast a Lash as well as Mold as often as possible, but I also don't really need corrosive projection because of the types of weapons I chose and the way I modded them. Then for the Exoslot, I went with Aviator, which is just an incredible mod. It gives you 40% damage reduction whenever you're in the air, so whenever you're just jumping about, or you're aim gliding, or you're bullet jumping, and it's super cheap, and it fits into the Exoslot, so this is an amazing mod that more people I think should use. After that, I wanted a ton of strength, so I went with Blind Rage. That's 2 ranks from the top to save on some efficiency, though it is not entirely necessary, and I'm also running Intensify for a grand total of 211% power strength. Then for some additional range, I decided to use Stretch, which increases the size of the clouds left behind by Contagion Cloud, which are pretty small by default, but if you don't feel like you need it, you can put in Ogre Secrets for more strength. Then, since this setup can actually fight some fairly high-level enemies, I decided to go with Steel Fiber and Vitality for some defense because, well, if you're dead, you're not doing a lot of damage, but you don't need to use these two in particular. You can play around with some different stuff like Primed Flow and Quick Thinking, or even Adaptation. Just try them out, see what you like. Just make sure you put in some form of defense so that you don't die the second you leave the simulacrum, okay? Then I wanted some power duration to make everything last longer, but to also get some knockdown recovery, so I went with Constitution, but if you're not going to be doing any melee and you're just going to be fighting the enemies at a distance, you can easily swap in Primed Continuity and you're going to get more duration, though you're not going to have any knockdown recovery. And finally we have the Augments, the first one being Contagion Cloud, which is what this setup is built around, which creates a 5-meter toxic cloud, which is affected by power range, that deals 300 toxin damage a second, which is affected by power strength, for 12 seconds, which is affected by power duration. So now you can kind of see why we have this weird combination of stats, but another thing you can see at the very bottom of this augment is that damage is twice as strong for melee kills, and that's one of the reasons why we have so much defense. It's so that we can actually take a normal melee weapon, go full melee, and get even more damage out of this setup than we would otherwise with a ranged weapon. And originally this was the only augment that I was using on this setup, but after playing around with it a little bit outside of the simulacrum, you know, in arbitrations and Elite Sanctuary Onslaught, I had to put in Regenerative Mold for healing. Now, you don't have to use this though if you're just going full melee, because then you can slap on probably Healing Return is going to be your best bet, and that's going to keep you very healthy, especially with the secondary defenses that you have here. The reason I went with it is because I didn't want this setup to be full melee. I wanted to use ranged weapons as well, because some of them synergize really well with this kind of setup, and yeah, this is just the best way of healing, especially if you don't have Arcane Grace, which is very expensive. And as far as the weapon setup is concerned, the weapons that felt the best and I had the most fun with were a hybrid-based Torrid with Corrosive and Blast, combined with a status-based Pox with Corrosive and Blast, and a status-based Zenistar with Corrosive and Blast. The idea being that we're going to use Corrosive to strip away any armor the enemies have, because that is the biggest damage reduction they have against the types of damage we do, and we're going to use Blast to keep them in our area of effect stuff, okay? Now, as far as the damage is concerned, it's actually quite good, especially since our weapons are really good, because with this much power strength, we're getting 67% of our weapon damage as extra toxin damage. So our weapons are pretty damn strong to begin with, and it just keeps getting better and better and better as you get the ball rolling, because the more enemies you kill, the more clouds you have, which is going to kill more enemies, which is going to create more clouds, and when you combine that with the AoE, the weapons I personally chose are leaving behind, you get a lot of damage. I was actually quite impressed at how much damage I was able to do with this, because you can really notice the clouds, especially in the simulacrum where the enemies tend to die at the same time. You get this big tick of damage coming from the clouds, and you can see it chunk the enemies really hard. And up until now, there was just a single weapon, one after another, and it was already pretty strong, but the power of this is in layering things on top of one another. So if you throw out a Zenistar disc, which is going to do damage, strip armor, proc blast, and then you throw in a couple of Pox grenades, or you shoot in some Torrid grenades, which are also going to do damage, strip armor and proc blast, and then as the enemies start dying, you get the clouds on top of them doing even more damage. Now, I'm not saying that this is better than a well put together sport setup, because very few things in this game are, okay? But it's, in my opinion, different in a good way. It's something different to do with Saryn other than just try to pop as many spores as possible, and it's still pretty strong, and most importantly, it's a lot of fun. It's a very active setup, but it's a ton of fun to use. Not everything has to be top tier, you know, sometimes it's just fun to do something a little bit different and just have fun. It's of course a lot better when it works out and actually does what you want it to do, which this definitely does. Just don't go into this thinking that it's gonna clear Sanctuary Onslaught better than your sort of standard spore setup, because it's not. It exceeded my expectations by quite a bit, because 300 base damage isn't a lot of base damage when all you can do is basically scatter with power strength. But it does more than enough damage and it's a fun setup, so if this augment is something you want to build around, you can totally do it. You can even focus it a lot more on the actual clouds than I did, because here I'm using it as more of an additional layer of AoE on top of the AoE I'm already creating with my weapons. But if you get yourself a good strong melee weapon, maybe even build a Zoff or something like this, you can go full melee and then you're gonna get double damage out of the clouds. And if you do that, you'll also be able to drop regenerative mount and replace it with something else, maybe more damage, more range, more duration, more defense, whatever you want, because you will most likely at that point rely on healing return, which is just better because it's free. But anyway, I think I've been rambling for long enough, so I thank you very much for watching as always guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time. Bye bye!